All right.
All
Yeah.
right.
We're on my. Hey, everybody. This is the first time I've done this, and let me check Facebook. I think that we're live, and I think that if you're watching, you're going to be able to ask questions or make comments or whatever. And that's going to be really exciting for us. So I hope you will. I'm Lauren Garrity, if you don't know. This is Kristyl, who you see on the screen, and she's going to have a chance to introduce herself. We're here for the very first wilderness stories. If you think of a better name for this, tell me. That is not my strength. I have no idea what to call things. But we, in my Sunday morning group, I've been talking about Rachel Held Evans' book so much lately because we've been reading her book. And she has a chapter called Deliverance Stories, all about how when we see God delivering God's people. So like the Israelites, and just like all throughout the Bible, we see God taking people through detours in the wilderness to get to the promised land. It always requires a detour. And Rachel says that it's like a very strengthening thing for us to share our stories. It's something that can heal. It's something that can increase our faith. And I had already been sort of thinking that this would be fun, especially since we're not together in person very often. So I thought, this is awesome. We're going to do this. So here's what Rachel said, because I feel like she says things, Rachel Held Evans, better than anybody about stories. She says that every time we retell stories of God's faithfulness in the past, whether around a candlelit cedar table or under a bright red and white shaped striped revival tent, we are reminded that if God can make a way for Moses and the Hebrew slaves, for Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, for the grandma living on Social Security, for the alcoholic marking 20 years sober, then maybe God can make a way for me too. She says that storytelling always has been and always will be one of humanity's greatest tools for survival. So hopefully that's what we're doing here. And Kristyl agreed to go first, which is really brave because I do not even know what I'm doing.
That's why I volunteered to go first.
Yeah. So she's the guinea pig.
Not much.
Yeah. So I was going to just start with a quick prayer for all of us here listening. And then I want Kristyl to introduce who she is. So just join me in prayer. Almighty God, thank you for Kristyl. Thank you for her being willing to do this with me and sharing parts, little parts and big parts, and whatever size parts she wants to share of her story today. Let it be a blessing to everyone who hears. Let it be a blessing for Kristyl. And let it just be a time that, strengthens our faith and renews us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Kristyl. So tell us about yourself. What do you think we should know?
Well, I'm Kristyl Kepley, and I am the Director of Discipleship at Messiah. And I'm an only child. I feel like that's an important thing to know about me. I used to teach ballroom dancing. That was my very first job. I was like junior high. I know that's a strange
cool.
I love baseball and football. I'm a Miami Hurricanes fan, but I've never played sports though. I'm a spectator. I have a PhD in linguistics. And so most of my educational background is in the study of the evolution of language and primarily in Creole languages, which it's just funny because I don't really use that at all now, but I'm still really fascinated with language. So a lot of my interest in scriptural things has to do with the linguistics, like the language that's being used and how that's translated and metaphors and things like that. I have 3 children. I'm married to my husband. I met when I was in high school, and we dated for a while and dated in college, and then we broke up, and then we got back together when we were 30. So yeah, that's a long story. I'll tell you that one another day. And I think that's it. I'm from Miami originally, and my husband was in the Army, so we've kind of lived all over like the Southeast, like in Alabama and Virginia and Georgia and Florida and North Carolina.
Cool.
And yeah.
Well, going back to the only child thing, I always do think it's interesting when I find out somebody's an only child or like their birth order, but why do you think that's important for us to know?
I think that it just, I don't know. I feel like I really wanted as a child to have this like huge family because I was an only child, but I really loved being an only child. And so I think that I just had a different relationship with the world because of being an only child. My dad was 45 when I was born. So he wasn't like in the, the early stages of trying to build a career or something. He was more like the downward slope. So I spent a lot more time, I think, just hanging out with grownups and with my parents' friends. All of their friends' children were, 10 or 15 years older than I was. So I just kind of inhabited a different world, I guess, as a child. And strangely, my husband did too. So he had a very similar kind of situation. He does have siblings, but they weren't born until he was 10. So kind of a similar story. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Cool. Yeah. We'll have to do part 2 and learn about maybe we'll bring Bart on and figure out what he'll tell us that you didn't tell us. I'm just kidding. Okay. So
Bart would rather die than have to be on live broadcast.
I actually think it is probably it is nerve-wracking because you're like, only 8 people are watching us, but it could be thousands, you never know.
8,000.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're watching, you should totally comment so we know you're here. Question for you, Kristyl. I'm thinking that when I talk with people, these are some questions I'll ask everybody, but I wondered, do you have a favorite Bible verse or a verse that's been really meaningful or a passage in your life?
Well, yes, I have 2 actually. I think, and of course, now that you're asking me, I'm gonna not say this.
I know, I put you on the spot.
But I think it's Jeremiah, or the Jeremiah 3, maybe. I don't know. It's the one that says I know the plans I have for you. I love that idea of, I realize in the context of it, he's talking about the Israelites as a people, but I love that verse because even though I don't really understand how that works as far as God having a plan, because obviously we have free will and all of it's a very complicated, tangled thing. But I love just knowing that God does have an overarching plan so that I'm not just out there flapping. And the other one I really love is Micah. I think it's Micah 6:8. It's what does the Lord require of you that you love mercy, I don't know. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
Yes, that's right.
And I love that one because I think that sometimes for me, especially, I'm very academically minded. I'm very I live in my head a lot. And so I think that I probably have a tendency more to look to making sure I'm checking all my boxes and doing all the right things. And so it is reassuring to know that really all that God requires of me is
that's true.
Love, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, and you're good. That's really what it boils down to. So
I have not thought of it like that. I love that.
Yeah.
Do you see Eric's question here?
Oh, I'm 5.5-ish. Something.
Okay.
5, 6, something like that.
That's pretty much average. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty average.
Here's another question. This is an easy one. It might not be easy. What's your favorite book you've read this year?
Oh.
Or last year?
It's not very spiritual. Okay, so my favorite book I've read recently that I really loved was A Gentleman in Moscow by Tolles, M.R. Tolles. It's fantastic. I love that book, Gentleman in Moscow. Okay. This year, though, during the pandemic, I started reading the Outlander series, and then I kind of got really hooked. It was I have never had time in my whole life to just sit down and read a huge, long, fluffy book. And so I did that, but then I got really involved and there are all these books. And so I've read a lot of that recently.
That makes me want to read them too. All right. I'm going to write it down if I could find my pencil.
If you want good literature though, read A Gentleman in Moscow. That one's beautiful.
I haven't read that either. All right. Okay, we're gonna go into the good stuff. If anybody
Okay.
else has questions, you could just be like typing them in the whole time. All right, so Kristyl and I had like a conversation offline basically to get ready. This was like a few weeks ago, right? And we were like, okay, how is this going to go? How is it going to flow? I want it to just be a very casual conversation where, you know, we're just like around the table. And so are all the people who are watching with us. And that's why I want people to just chime in and everything. And I want it to be like, you know, not stressful. So Kristyl can kind of control where we go with this. But when we were kind of talking about like potential questions, I noticed one of the things that like Kristyl, when we were looking at questions, she kind of was able to grab onto first. Like, where have you seen God in your life? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we start there? Like, you can start wherever you want to be.
All right. So where have I seen God in my life? I think that like so many people who that you're probably going to ask to do this, if you don't have this like big story, this big, you know, on the road to Damascus kind of moment, then I think that people can be tempted to feel like their story is not that interesting or that worthwhile. And so I kind of have the like I come from this place of I went to a Christian school from the time I was in kindergarten until I was in 12th grade. I really could talk theology. I really understood like all, you know, all these different arguments and about you know, just all of the very like intellectual understandings of the Bible. And my parents' dearest friends were the pastor of our church and his wife. So I think that I mean I never had a conversion experience because I just kind of lived in that all the time. And so I think it really wasn't until I was, like I told you, the first time I ever really felt like God was an actual real thing as opposed to just this thing that I was learning about in an academic way was when I was a heartbroken teenager and I was really just sad and I remember crying out to God and audibly hearing God speak back to me. Just like and all these Bible verses that I had learned a million, you know, all these years through all of my schooling, but hearing God really speak back to me in a way that I had like such peace was like, oh, okay, then everything's fine. And that was like the most road to Damascus kind of thing that happened to me as a young person that helped me see that that it wasn't just an academic exercise.
Like,
But
what did you hear God say? Can you tell us?
yeah, I mean, I really just heard like that Bible verse I was saying to you before,
Oh,
like I
okay.
as I have
Okay. Yeah.
like you're good.
Mm-hmm.
So but not in a callous way, in a very like reassuring, comforting way. Like so much so that I was like bawling and I remember just being like, oh, well, okay then. Like it was just fine.
Yeah.
So so that's like the most road to Damascus I get because after that it you know it just took a long time for me to really grasp it completely with my heart as to really have that like circumcision of the heart thing where you really recognize in yourself the ways in which you fail or how you know how sinful you are even when you're not doing anything that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't
Yeah.
murdered anybody, but when you really get to a place where you're like, wow, I am just like horribly selfish. Wow. And you know,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm a pretty good person most of the time, but oh my gosh, look how like depraved and terrible I am really. And I think that it was the time of doing that and then realizing that that's not news to God and that he loves me not just anyway, but that was like he loved me before I was ever a sinful person.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like, it's
So
important because it helps us know our need for God, but at the same time, to God, it's not. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it's just I think so much of my understanding of God is colored by having children and
Mm-hmm.
the way that you know you can how you just adore your newborn child and they're perfect in every way. And even though you know that they are going to grow up and drive you bonkers and do crazy things and, make you want to throw them out of the house and all that, you walk into it just loving them completely and knowing that no matter what they do, you're going to love them completely.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess a lot of just, getting those kind of ideas in my head about God and really knowing them. But the one thing though, I love that I really like to tell people that I think is a clear way that I saw God in my life that was more dramatic was when we used to be farmers, and I always say, like, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It was wonderful. There was so much good in it. And yet we had no money and we were always struggling and it was very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started, I started working at a church, and which is a whole other good story. But I was working in this church, and someone had recommended to me that I read this devotional book. And honestly, I don't even remember what the book was now. But I had heard from a couple of people like, oh, this is such a fantastic book. You really need to read it. So I read it, and it didn't really grab me. I read the first couple chapters, and it wasn't that it was bad. It just didn't really apply to me. Like, nothing that I was reading really spoke to where I was in my life at that moment. But I just kept reading it because it was on my bedside table. And then a few weeks later, I had snuck into the church on like a Friday afternoon or something when the office was closed, because I just had some work I needed to get done and I wanted to be able to do it in quiet with no one else around. And so I hear this knock at the front door, and I'm just like, oh, not going to the door. I have all this stuff I've got to get done. And I hear the knock again, and I'm getting annoyed because I just like want this person to go away. And I hear the knock again. And then I hear, as clear as day, a voice say, go to the door.
I want your kind of like, yeah, I like that. You hear God.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go to the door then. So I go to the door, and there's this woman who attends the church regularly. I recognize her and I know her name, but I don't know her at all. I don't know anything about her. I've only ever seen her come to church by herself. So I don't know if she's married or she has children, or she's probably like 10 years older than I am. I know nothing about her, just that I've seen her face frequently in the church. So she says, is pastor here? No, he's not. I'm the only person here. Okay, well, can you pray with me then? And she looks obviously kind of frantic, disturbed, upset about something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told her, I was like, there's no one here but me. I'm so happy to pray with you. Come on in. So we go into my office, and I'm kind of waiting for her to give me some clue here about what we're supposed to be praying about. But it's clear she's not going to talk to me. So it's kind of this awkward scene where I'm kind of waiting for her to tell me what we should pray about. And she's just kind of waiting for me to start praying. So, all right, we'll just start praying. So she reaches out to grasp my hands. And so I'm holding her hands, and she's sitting across from me, and I'm holding her hands, and I have no idea what to pray. So just all these words started just falling out of my mouth from this book that I had been reading. I mean, and it was one of those things where, like, you're talking and you're thinking in your head, like, where am I getting this from? How am I saying these things right now? And I was just like, it was just like spirit, like, falling right out of my mouth. And so then, by the end, I would say amen. And she's just like, she's like tears everywhere streaming down. And she's like, I don't know how you knew, like, all those things to say. Like, it's exactly where I am. Like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And she was like, do you know, like, what's going on with my daughter? And I'm like, I don't know anything. And it was just the most, that experience was one of those moments where your mind is so blown because you hear about these kind of things, like people, the spirit just took over, and you're like, what does that mean? But really, like, that is what happened to me. I happen to have read this book, but like I said, it really didn't impact me that much. Well, at least I didn't think so. And so it was just flowing right on out.
Oh,
and I know it was crazy.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like that's a really good example of the way that God can show up in your life and And like I always tell my kids, you know, sometimes you're the instrument and sometimes you're the object. And so you just gotta, you just have to be ready. You just have to be like situational awareness, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes things are coming at you and sometimes you're the one that's sending them forth. So
Man,
yeah.
I'm a little envious of like all the audible speaking that God does in your life. I mean, God speaks to all of us differently, but I'm like, geez, that's like a theme that shows up for you over
I
and over
know.
again.
I wish that it happened a lot more. It
I
would
know.
be, we were talking about that this morning in Sunday school with the kids. I was like, life would be so much easier if God was just like, Kristyl, here's what to do. And
I would
it'd be
love
so
that
much
too.
easier. But I actually read a really great thing about that too once, that which I will not do justice, but essentially what they were saying was not that it's not that God doesn't care what you do. It's just that God takes joy in watching us live our life. Like
Mm-hmm.
again, like a parent, you know, it's not that like your kid has to grow up and be a doctor or has to grow up and be a whatever, an accountant. It's so much of it is just the joy that you have watching your child become who they are. And what a blessing that is to see your child do that. And I mean, I think, my goodness, how much more for God? Like, you know, I don't think God cares what our job is when we grow up. I think God just loves to see us wrestle with the things that life throws at us and how we sometimes are victorious and sometimes, you know, it's a disaster, but then that sends us running home. And, you know, that's a beautiful thing about life.
Yeah.
And about having a relationship with God, knowing that God has a plan for you, but it's a loose plan.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I love, Pia just made me laugh. Pia said, I love your God voice. So, that's great. I love it.
Hello.
That's good. Yeah, I bet you that's what God sounds like. I don't know. Okay, so Kristyl, one of the things I had on my mind after we talked was, so I'm going to put you on the spot again, because part of the story of how you landed at this church is like, you know, I don't remember. I remember, but we won't have to go into all that. But you did say you had looked at seminaries and you happened to be in Miami then, right? And there were like Baptist seminaries, a Catholic seminary. And as a woman, you really like, you even talked to them and they were like, that's not going to happen. And so is that when you took a different route educationally?
Yes. And it's so funny because, you know, I think that, well, at least for me, I sort of had this idea in my head of like what I was good at. Like I'm good at schooling kind of things. Like I'm good in my head. That's where I meant to go. And so even though I was a good teacher, I never thought about teaching in any capacity beyond teaching adults, because it just so happened that's kind of how I started when I was in graduate school. And that's really why I went to graduate school. I didn't really know what else to do with myself, but I thought, well, I can't go to seminary. And at the time, my dad had cancer and I didn't want to like go off to, you know, another state far away or something. So am I considering taking classes at Wesley? Oh my gosh. Yes, I would love to.
That's where I was going to go with that. Amy, you took the wind out of my sails, but
I know.
I'm glad you did. I was like, because after, I want you to finish what you were saying, but that's what I was wondering. Like, well, could it be now?
Yeah. I mean, it was really the reason that I just went to school for something else. And I got interested in doing other things because that just didn't seem like that door didn't feel like it was open.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, but it worked out. You know, sometimes you have to like circumvent the thing to get to the right spot. Sure. So.
Amy said sorry. She said sorry for taking the wind out of my sails. No, it's good. I'm glad you did. That's what I want everybody to be doing, asking the question.
Yes. Like I would love to do that. Yes, I would love it. It's on my list of things.
We love it there. Amy and I love it there. I think it's like one of my top life experiences. But yeah, Amy said she had to ask because she has to leave for youth group soon. Um, okay, so Kristyl. Well, now, so I'm so glad. I'm really joking, Amy. I really am. I'm glad you asked that question. So you've kind of told us already some of your little stories. How do you see God working now? Like, where are you seeing? Sometimes it's harder to see God in the moment, but are you able to see him? I know you've been like dealing with housing situations and all kinds of stuff.
Well, I think that so I think God knows me well enough to know like how much I need to feel like really reassured and confident, So I don't feel like set adrift, like, oh my gosh, is this the wrong thing? Because I'm having a hard time getting a house. I don't think of it like that. I think that so one way I see God working for sure is that even in the way that I came to Messiah it's so funny because my husband had been looking for another job and I really loved where we lived outside of Atlanta. And I wasn't interested in moving and he knew I wasn't interested in moving, but he'd been looking for a job for like a year for just something different because he was very unhappy where he was. And every single thing he was getting offered, they were all in DC. And I was like, no, not doing it. So finally he got this job that he has now. It's in Springfield. And I was like, all right, fine. And I was working in children's ministry at a church in Georgia. And so I told him, I was like, I don't even know if I'll even be able to find a job there. I mean, they don't just grow on trees and I don't know what you expect of me here, but look, I'll show you how hard it is. You can't just Google a church and find one. So I Googled, I didn't even go to like the Methodist job webpage, nothing. I literally went to Google, which is where you go if you're not really serious about finding a job. And I just wrote like church job, Springfield, Virginia. And this job popped up. It was the very first thing. And I started reading the description. I was like, oh my gosh, I would love this job. This is like my dream job. This is like the perfect kind of job for me. And so my husband just laughed.
You were started. You're right.
That's like my entire experience with God is that we are just constantly like in a big, like it's just always a laugh riot because God is always doing these hysterical things to me. And so I just laugh along with him because he does things like that. Like, I'm like, I won't be able to find a job there. And then he's like, ha, 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 here you go.
I'm going to try to challenge God that way and see what happens.
I know, seriously. I have so many experiences like that with God where I've said like, well, this will just never be. And then boom, that thing happens. I'm like, oh, you think you're funny.
So one more question, and then I'm going to ask, after this, I'll ask like, what else, is there anything else I haven't asked? But I'm wondering like I think I know what your passion is. Well, you probably have multiple passions, but like, what is your heart's like deepest passion, if you could name one, or like what breaks your heart, like what is, do you know?
Yeah. I think that, so kind of how I got into children's ministry was, so I was asked if I was interested in doing that. And I thought that was crazy because at the time I'd only ever taught adult students. I was like, that's crazy. I don't teach children, but I like children. And I was always in churches where the youth group or like the young adults or whatever always were like well stocked and didn't need volunteers and everything else. It was always the children's ministry area that really was in great need. So I always found myself volunteering in some capacity there and always getting along so well with the kids and everything else. But I just never saw myself doing that for some reason. But so when this idea of doing children's ministry for real was introduced to me, I was like, that's crazy, but whatever, I'll research what that looks like. And because that's what I do, I'm a researcher. So I read some articles by the Barna Group that talked about children's ministry. And the main thing that I remember taking away from that research I did was how a person's concept of God is largely developed by the time they're 5 years old. and that thereafter it's very difficult to transform it. So if you grow up, I mean, up to the age of 5, if you grow up believing that God is like an angry judge, or if you grow up believing that God is very remote, or that God is, only like chooses certain people that he really likes a lot and things like that. If that is the way that you sort of see God by the time you're 5 years old, that while of course it can be changed, it's very hard to, it just becomes like solidified in your mind and in your heart. And so I guess this is my long way of answering your question. That was so disturbing to me, that, and also inspiring. I thought, my gosh, well then, like, what greater thing is there than to be able to help children, especially, develop this very sober and sensible view of God, where that he loves you, that he's like wild and crazy about you. And so I guess my passion, and of course the thing that like breaks my heart too, like all revolves around that. Like it is so deeply troubling to me, people who don't know that they are loved in all the ways that looks like, that all the deep problems of humanity spring from people not knowing that they are so loved and so valuable. And so that is, and so it's not just with children, of course, but that was really where that was born for me, was helping people to really learn that God just loves them like crazy.
So do you feel like you've always had a view of God that has reflected a God like that, like a loving God? Has that always been an image of God that you've had?
Yes. I think that I was very fortunate to grow up in a family that was really the view of God, that God was never like a mean judge. And strangely, I did the school that I went to did not have that attitude so much. So like when I was in first or second grade, it was first grade, my teacher told me that my parents were going to hell because they had both been divorced before they married each other. But so I was 6 years old in first grade, but I told her, I was like, that's not true. That's not what the Bible says. I mean, I was ready to like fight with her about it. So I think that even at that age, whereas someone being told, I think a lot of kids being told something like that at 6 years old would, it'd be like a tragic thing. I was so sure of God's absolute love that I was like, that poor woman is crazy. So
yeah. I think that it's hard for people, even if, especially if they have like a hard relationship with one of their parents, that can really inform our view of God. And sometimes a lot of healing needs to take place around that. Yeah. And I want to share this comment with you from Tom Eakin, but I wanted to wait. So
okay.
You see it, so you can read it now.
Okay.
And everyone can read it. And he said, "Welcome to Messiah" at the end.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be a Messiah. I love it here.
Let's see. And then Amy. Okay, so I want to know, like, does anybody watching have any questions that I'm not thinking of? And then Kristyl, do you have anything that I'm not thinking to ask? Like any stories or tidbits, or I knew you'd be the perfect person to talk with, because you're really, like Tom said, you're just an excellent communicator. And yeah, Amy and I talk about how when we preach, we're like, yeah, Kristyl, the children's message is the highlight. It's like the highlight of it. So good. We love you for that. So anyway, what are we missing here? Do you have anything else you can think of?
Oh my gosh. I mean, you know me, I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but I guess that, what else can I tell you? I mean, I think really big turning points for me in my life were really, as a child, I thought that if you wanted to do work for God, essentially, that meant you either had to be a pastor or a missionary. And I remember being a little kid, and not that I was like super hyper religious as a child. I just, I went to Christian school and stuff. So this was in my head a lot. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I cannot be a missionary. Like I hate the heat, and everywhere missionaries go is really hot. And I don't want to do that. And so I think that, that becoming old enough to, or I guess conscious enough to be able to say that, to just throw yourself like into the river of God's will and just be happy. Just know that you're anchored no matter. So it's okay. And so when people ask me like, how are you dealing with this like craziness with your move and everything? I mean, that's really how, because this is like small potatoes and all of the things of the world, right? Like, yes, it's annoying that I don't have a house, but it'll be fine. Like I am just in the river of God's will. And sometimes that is a slow moving stream. And sometimes it is crazy rapids, and we just go with the flow because, to extend the metaphor, God is captaining the ship, all is well. I'm just on for the ride. So, so Pia asks, are you looking forward to the move? Are my kids? Yes, my kids are actually. They are. I think that actually COVID really did help because they have been removed from their normal life in Georgia for such a long time that I don't think it feels as like abrupt and like being torn out of your life. Everyone's been torn out of their life. So I think that helped a lot. And they're really excited. They are excited to go and have cooler weather. They're very upset. We keep missing the snow. So we're hoping for one more good snow before we, by the time when we get there.
Yeah, you never know. It can go through April, and then we're all like, ugh.
And so we'll be back in Virginia, hopefully really soon. Hopefully, I mean, Bart's there right now. My husband's there. He's working out of a Marriott, and he's looking for houses for us. And so we put in an application for a house on Thursday, but because of the long weekend, we still haven't heard anything. So,
and maybe one of our 18,000 viewers are going to have a house for you. So we'll see.
Yeah, really. I mean, can I just say real quick, like how amazing the people of Messiah are? Because I cannot tell you how many people have emailed me and said, hey, I live in such and such neighborhood and it's such a great place. If you want me to look for houses, I will. Or if you'd like me to go and check out a place for you, I'll do it. Like y'all are the nicest, most like genuinely helpful, loving people. I'm so excited to be a part of to really be a part, to be there with you all.
I agree with you on that. Let me just share this dream I had. And I've not shared it before because it's silly, but it characterizes Messiah. So like my worst nightmare is getting up to preach or something without notes. Like I've had this dream many times, like where I'm just like, I'll have like a huge stack of papers and it's like, none of it is what I need. That's a reoccurring nightmare, I'll say. This one time I had this dream that I get up and it's like, I had this huge stack, like couldn't find I'm just like, all right, so instead of trying to flub it, I was just like, I'm sorry, you all, I can't preach, so that was my dream. So then at the end of church, walking out and then, standing outside the doors where everybody shakes hands and everybody was like, that was a wonderful sermon, I was like, I didn't even say anything, but that's Messiah, it's just, Messiah is very generous and super nice and loving. So I was like, I love that dream. It just says exactly who Messiah is.
Oh, I have truly, truly felt that. So
yeah.
I believe it.
All right. Okay. Anything else, anybody? I'm trying to see if I missed anything. Well, I wanted to just say this blessing, but I say it all the time. This is for Kristyl and for everybody. Think about this though, because we've heard it so many times, but you think about it like this is the best blessing. And it's from the Bible. And it goes like this. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. I think that's the best, because what's better than the peace of God? So with that, I will see you all next week. Thank you so much, Kristyl.
Oh, thank you so much. It was fun.
Bye.